Oi, all right, how's it going? I'm Grant, you're you. This is Doodle Review, a channel that's about all types of music, but we're kind of alt rock fiends first and foremost. I pretty much review something in the rock category every other day. So if that's your vibe, subscribe. You'll definitely hear me talk about a band you love in an upcoming video, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find something new that you will love. Green Day, a California arena rock pop punk band now in their 37th year since forming in the East Bay back in 1987, have returned with their 14th studio album, Saviors. While the band have been able to keep their legions of hardcore fans pretty happy over the past decade or so with multiple albums and consistent touring, they faced diminishing returns from critics, with opinion from the press kind of hitting rock bottom with 2020's Father of All. Seemingly looking to course correct, the band and like a crack PR team began teasing this record towards the end of last year. With song titles like The American Dream Is Killing Me, a gritty, evocative black and white album cover, and Trump-baiting live performances, the subliminal seeds were sown for headlines like "A return to form," "A true successor to American Idiot," "Their best in years." Well, what do you reckon? Is it that, or it's true in the same way that narrowly avoiding shitting the bed is way better than shitting the bed? That was my gut reaction after my very first listen to Saviors. I post those up on TikTok, by the way. Is it worth following me there? Well, based on the pure poetry off the top of the dome there, probably not. But I will say my opinion has softened after some repeated listens. It's actually not that bad. Before we get into it though, as it's kind of the first time I've really ever talked about this band on the channel, here's just my overall vibe on Green Day. I was first introduced to their music when I was about 10 years old, probably like 2002, 2003. My dad actually took a bit of a shine to the band after having bought my older brother CDs like Dookie and Nimrod for birthdays and Christmas. So for months, whenever I rode with Dad, International Super Hits would be our soundtrack. This was right when I was starting to figure out that I was into rock music, or in the kind of playground speak at the time, that I was a skater and not a townie. Then September 2004 rolled around. I just started year 7, which is like secondary school here, I guess high school in the States, and American Idiot came out. So having spent the last couple of years with my burnt CDR copy of International Super Hits, I was primed for this new Green Day album with its Bush-era political commentary, striking imagery, epic long songs and dramatic videos. 12-year-old me was like mind blown. I would talk the album up to anyone that would listen as if it was Dark Side of the Moon or the White Album, and clearly I wasn't alone, because in art class by the end of that school year, when we were given a task to kind of produce a canvas using the skills that we'd learned to but really create whatever we wanted, about a quarter of the year group incorporated some version of the Heart Hand Grenade album artwork. At this exact time, for older fans like my brother, for instance, aged 16, 17, 18, for whom Green Day had been a cool band but had now ultimately moved on to edgier and cooler stuff, like the mainstream appeal of American Idiot, the image, the dramatics, the eyeliner, the band and this album was just a complete write-off in their eyes. Another example of a once cool band selling out and starting to suck as they pander to a new audience. If they'd been quite as cool as their kid brother and have written reviews back then, they probably would have given it a 0. But 20 years later, where do we stand? Well, it turns out for me, American Idiot was a passing phase. I kind of burnt myself out on it, and at the same time also started to discover my taste in alternative music through albums like Nevermind, and eventually leading me to the underground punk stuff like Black Flag. By the time 21st Century Breakdown arrived, I just had no interest in new Green Day, and that's basically how it's been since. I've got a lot of time for Dookie, and I've had a really good time actually seeing the band live, but the occasional new tracks I've heard do, I have to say, sound like bad butt rock stadium rock bullshit. And with regards to American Idiot, well, it's still a pretty good album, I think, but the stuff I used to think made it the best thing ever made are now, I would say, its weakest elements. The political commentary, while certainly a time capsule of post 9/11 Bush era revolt, is pretty tawdry, and the rock opera of it all just feels like a parody now. That being said, the title track, Holiday, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, they're classics. And of course I get a little tug of nostalgia if I hear of any of the other tracks, and when pushed I could probably sing you back the lyrics to a lot of those songs. So my expectations for Saviours, well, like I say, I haven't heard much from the band in the last 20 years, but what little I have has been on the kind of, to me, uninspired like sport rock side of things. But I appreciate the band are world-class rock performers. Billy Joe has written some classics in his day, and they've certainly hyped this and pushed all the right buttons in terms of giving us a sense that artistic integrity is being put first on this record. So I would say going into it I was curious and quite optimistic. There's one song on there called Corvette Summer. It's terrible. And yes, I was a touch disappointed at first. A few more listens in though, and I can see now that reaction is really coming from my surprise at just how bad 2 or 3 tracks are. Surprised that despite the PR pushing this messaging that the band were returning to the sound of their most loved work. Surprised that some tracks seem to continue to do all the things Green Day have been criticised for as far as delivering, lowest common denominator jock rock. I mean, One-Eyed Bastard couldn't be more of a perfect example. That riff is just so played out. It couldn't be more sports arena, big foam, finger waving shite. It's literally the Pink song, the one that's like na 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 na, I want to start a fight. If you've ever heard more than a few minutes of a Green Day live album or seen them live, you'll have heard the reverence Billy Joe has for doing big stadium rock and doing it right and putting on a big show, because he's constantly parroting that Freddie Mercury trademark ew. So it does give context for why the band might see these sort of tracks as a good idea. Honestly, I actually don't hate the lyrics here. The Vendetta is a friend of mine thing, even the whole bada bing bada boom, I think it could work, but packaging it up in the most paint by numbers stadium rock riff just tips it too much over the line, and I cringe every time I hear it. Speaking of cringing, let's talk Corvette Summer. I mean, what the actual piss. This is the most egregious example of butt rock on the album. It's almost so egregious it could be a piss take. Look, the "here we go now" ad-libs sound like the band are directing a friggin' line dance. It's absolutely wild they thought this would be cool. And again, similar to One-Eyed Bastard, I think what makes it even more of a tragedy is like the verses are decent, that melody's fun, but then you get a "here we go now" and a cowbell and we're into that chorus. It's criminal. While it's not quite as cringeworthy, I also think The American Dream Is Killing Me is, again, completely uninspiring, and being the first song on the album probably has a lot to do with that instant gut reaction it gave me. These songs are such a blight on the record that I found myself hating the whole thing. But as I've brought myself to see past these absolute duds, I've come to view the album as more of a mixed bag rather than a trash bag. Look Ma No Brains is a song that actually made me realise as much as what makes those awful tracks suck is how derivative they are. I'm not actually craving innovation from this band. No Brains is just a solid rock banger with trademark Billy Joe earworm melodies and fantastic energy with great performances. Once my kind of red mist had initially cleared, this was one of the first songs that stood out and made me accept that actually, in some respects, Green Day have managed to tap into some of their classic sound on Saviours. The next track to really pique my interest was the track Dilemma. Again, it's no frills, with even a guitar solo you could politely call pretty lame, but the vocal melodies are great and it's delivered with real passion on the part of Billy Joe. We even get a little grit and growl in his vocals, something that pops up a couple of times on the record, and it sounds really good. Goodnight Adeline is a pretty by the numbers like arena rock ballad, but again it's executed really well, with Armstrong's vocals again being a standout. On this one I actually swear I can hear a twinge of Oasis, although it's delivered with a classically more American like bombast. I'm sure if you got AI to do a version with Noel Gallagher singing the lead, it would probably work quite well. My favourite on the album is undoubtedly Living in the 20s. This track gives an indication of what I'm sure that the band might have thought the entire album sounds like, but is really just captured in this one song. This is tight, focused and gritty. where the lyrical observations are actually pretty on point. I really like that "I've got a robot and I'm fucking it senseless" line. And again, some grit and conviction from Billy Joe. The tone and approach to this guitar solo is something that it would have been great to hear applied to the rest of the tracks, because I mean, almost every other time a song comes to do a solo for me on this album, it falls flat. The production on this album overall is pretty solid. When you have a 30-year strong stadium rock act, whether it is Green Day or it could be Foo Fighters or Pearl Jam, let's say, the best thing you can do is just get out of the way, because these acts have literally learned how to fill football fields with sound. But what I will say is that it's mixed to such a point where everything feels super squashed together. If you do put on a Dookie track or an American Idiot either side of a song like 1981, you'll realize it. There's a lack of dynamic range, and the drums especially sound squeezed flat. The rest of the songs here that I haven't mentioned, I think, are largely forgettable, but not bad. Father to a Son, wants to be Wake Me Up When September Ends, and it falls short, but it's fine. 1981 is one note and fun. It's notable because we finally hear Mike Dirnt weave some of his trademark bass fills, which I don't think we hear enough of on Saviours. Lyrically, the album works best when Billy Joe isn't trying to rehash the American Idiot thing. I mentioned Living in the 20s as a good example of that. I think Bobby Socks maybe comes off a little like pandering, but to be honest, it doesn't sound too disingenuous and it kind of works. My biggest ick, if you like, and ironic that I use that current phrase, which will probably pass us by in a few months, but what puts me off are the various call outs to TikTok and Instagram. Whenever I hear that, I just replace that word with MySpace, and it makes you realize how bad this is going to sound in 10 or even 5 years, to be fair. And I mean, it's hard. With the speed at which culture moves, I appreciate it's difficult for an artist to write about today directly while skirting these huge parts of the culture. Back in the day, I suppose you were lucky you could get away with talking about TV because it's been around for the best part of a century. The equivalent is social media, but yeah, I'm worried that it's just going to date things. Overall, I think this is actually a pretty good step back in the right direction for the band. I can see the big fans loving it, but for me, some pretty huge misses pull an otherwise mildly decent album down. But it does have its couple big highlights. To me, it's about 4.8. How are you feeling about it though? Is this the return to form you wanted, or another one fit for the landfill? Let me know in the comments, subscribe, share some thoughts, show some love, or just wholesome abuse. And no doubt I'm right for it with this review, but yeah, hit me up. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers, mate. Bye.